We've been hearing about the chemtrails and the fringe flag thing for over 20 years now. Howard Ruff told us that the US dollar was going to collapse, and that was in the 1970s. And my mom, well, she was in the newsroom, standing next to the telex machine when the machine typed out the message, "Shots fired from the grassy knoll." They say we're all conspiracy nuts. We're all searching for the truth, but only God is the truth. And sad to say, it seems like fewer and fewer people are searching for God these days. Because, I guess sometimes you feel like a nut and sometimes you don't. Welcome to Illinois Bridging Awareness. I'm Stanley Smith, and at Illinois Bridging Awareness, we're trying to bridge the gap. We're trying to bridge the gap between our thinking self, our feeling, being, knowing, and spiritual selves. It sometimes feels a little crowded in here. And what is that? What's that awareness thing? What's that all about? Sometimes that's the important place that we can arrive at when we step out of the way of ourselves. On last Saturday's call, we talked about being on the edge, being on the edge of a major breakthrough. We talked about the folly of making anything bigger than God. We also talked about having a pain identity or being a member of the pain community, and how questions can really be an incantation of doubt cast on ourselves and others. In the middle of the call, Carol Kerr blurted out, and the churches, they shut down during the pandemic because they didn't want to rock the boat of their charitable tax status or grant writing programs. I love moments like that because it brings us back to the topic of conspiracy. What what is a conspiracy? Everything seems to be a conspiracy in our time. When we started out here, when I started out on our journey together in this pandemic narrative story, I started to be aware more and more of conspiracy. Some people ask me, do you watch, Netflix programs? And I always say, oh no, I don't need to watch I don't need to watch Netflix because I follow conspiracy. It's so much more entertaining and it's free. At the at the start of this story, I felt until very recently, I assumed that conspiracy was something that just applied to us on the conservative side, on the nut side, end of the spectrum, because that's what the establishment was always telling us, that it was just all in our heads. And because of that, we were all nuts. Being that contrarian that I am, of course, this is exactly where I want to be. I want to be on the opposite side of things. But until recently, I've become aware that the conspiracy also exists on the liberal end of the spectrum, on the progressive side of things. I noticed this. We came into my awareness last Sunday at Sunday Coffee Hour when all of a sudden I noticed my liberal friends going off on wild tangents about politics, AI, and big pharma. They also cited a book called Evil Geniuses, which is about the world being taken over as part of a vast right-wing conspiracy. Hmm. I was I was so disappointed to learn this, that apparently I've not been part of a special insider club after all. In fact, I've been part of a larger phenomenon. In the study of the Bible, I try to keep in mind that the story of the Bible is not the story of the world, but the story of the Hebrew people. In similar manner, the pandemic narrative has not really been a story about a pandemic. It's been a story about us. And the idea about conspiracy being a phenomenon, well, that's a real thing. I went to a lecture series about this last year at the University of Chicago on the topic of phenomenology, which is the study of the phenomenon of phenomenons. In the lecture series, they talked about conspiracy and fringe thought and how most new ideas, concepts, and breakthroughs start as fringe thought. In art and literature, we have the avant-garde. It's a new way of seeing things. And an example of that might be in its time, the creation of the tartan check, which was created as a textile design to represent clans and families. It probably seemed far out in its time, but now it's as common as wearing a plaid shirt on a summer day. Everything starts somewhere, and that usually has some resistance. When things start out, there's usually some natural resistance. The tartan check is also indicative of the topic of symbols and art and images being used in place of words, because as we've discussed before on this call, words are often insufficient or problematic. After the French Revolution, words were eliminated from the French language to better control the narrative and control thought with fewer words available. And this led to an unexpected consequence: the flourishing of French poetry to convey ideas and concepts beyond the words themselves. Poetry is a kind of a conflation of thought. We we probably need more of that in our time, but instead we seem to be suffering from truth inflation, where everything is a truth except the one truth, God Himself. Often on the call, we've had the benefit of Jim Downs, who talks about the positive qualities of word pairings for the additive quality of words. Words combined or paired together are often greater than the sum of their parts. Last week, Jim paired together the word responsible and principled. Responsible implies to me the idea of consequences, and principle implies a more aspirational worldview. And that gets us back to the supposed gap between two opposing concepts, or perceived to be opposing concepts, because it's just how we choose to see it. We choose to see it as opposing. But Jim invites us to see it not as opposing, but as complementary. In this time of Lent, we're reminded that when God started the world, He was doing something new, and He got some pushback. We chose to see His creation as opposing our way, instead of seeing how being in relation to God can be complementary. But even if we still can't see that, perhaps we can step aside from ourselves for just a moment. And in that moment, God can do the heavy lifting. He can do the heavy lifting for us. And in fact, in that moment, perhaps we can see that He's already done so. And that actually is the best kind of fringe thought or conspiracy imaginable. If you would like to join us on the Illinois Bridging Awareness journey together, we have the Saturday call every Saturday at 9 a.m. Central Time. I will include my email in the description of this video. I'll be happy to send you an invitation. And I look forward to seeing you very, very soon.